So happy to have you. You will get a notice that we're recording. We do record all of our sessions, and those are available to you on our webpage. We are going to get started right at 1 o'clock. So just here in a few minutes. But as a reminder, if you have any teammates or colleagues that are going to be joining a few minutes late, no big deal, because you're going to get a version of these slides as we're talking, and you'll have access to the full recording. So no worries about that. And we'll just give folks a couple minutes to get in here, and then we will get going. I love that we have some ambitious folks that got here a little early. That always makes me so happy. If you need a minute to, we can use my voice to adjust your audio and make sure you're hearing everything okay. You can turn on live transcripts so that you have that accessibility option, and you can kind of adjust that on your screen as needed. And in this minute or two here, if you need to grab a drink of water or run to the restroom, now's a really good time to do that before we get going. We're all being blessed in Ohio with the like sneaky early fall that I think is not going to stick around. We'll get back to having our little summer moment, and then we'll go into real fall. You know, Ohio likes to tease us with the weather. So I don't know how others are getting along with that, but I've been kind of sad. I wanted to get in my pool a couple more times, and it's been a little cold for that. All right, so it is 1 o'clock, so I want to go ahead and get started. We are going to provide the slides to you in the chat, so you'll have access to those now. Thank you so much for being here at the Ohio McKinney-Vento Community of Practice. We're excited to have you. Today, we are focusing in on some of our special populations. This is our third session, and we will be talking about unaccompanied youth and English learners, identifying and meeting the needs, and lots of other good stuff. So we are super excited that you are here with us today. We are recording, so you'll have access to this recording after the session, and the slides will be available to you in the chat momentarily, if not already. Just to make sure, a couple of housekeeping things. Everyone's on mute right now. This is a webinar, so unless we give you permission to unmute, you won't be able to, but if there is something that someone desperately needs to say, you can send me a private message and we can work through that. You can use the chat to ask questions. As I mentioned, the slides are available to you. We're not doing any polls today, so we're going to keep that moving forward. If you have any audio or video issues, you can just try logging off and logging back on. If that still doesn't work, feel free to shoot us an email at homelesseducation@cohio.org, and we will do our best to provide some support to you to make sure that you can get in and fully access this session. If not, we will make sure that you have access to the recording and all of the materials so that you are not missing out on anything. With that, let me talk to you about what we are going to be talking about today. Someone just sent me a message that the chat is disabled. So someone, Ami, Evelyn, if you can make sure that the chat is working, that would be great. If not, for now, just keep using the Q&A box, folks, and we will keep working on the chat. We've had a couple Zoom issues today. We're not really sure what's going on with that. But we will work on it. So we're going to walk through welcome and introductions. We're going to provide an overview of COHHIO Course to Home. Some of you are really immersed in COHHIO Course to Home, and we thank you for that. Some of you are just kind of learning about COHHIO Course to Home today. So we want to make sure that you're clear on what COHHIO Course to Home is and how we can bring you supports and resources. We're going to provide an overview of what this community of practice is for those of you that are joining us for the first time. We're going to be talking about supporting immigrant and migrant and English learning students experiencing homelessness. And we're going to cover some reminders and resources, and then we will wrap up. So that's how we'll use our time today. Our objectives for today are understanding the components of COHHIO Course to Home, understanding the educational rights of vulnerable students, learning best practices for meeting the needs of vulnerable students, and importantly, learning about the resources to support vulnerable students in some of our special populations that we're talking about today, experiencing homelessness specifically here in Ohio, and we do have lots of Ohio-specific resources available to you in the slides. I'm just fiddling with the chat a little bit to try and get that working. I want to go ahead and use the Q&A box if we still haven't got. Okay, are we good in it? Can someone let me know? Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting us know that there was an issue with it, because that would have really hindered this next activity, which is letting us know about you. So take a moment in the chat. Let us know your name and share your pronouns if you're comfortable with that. Let us know the name of your district, or if you're an ESC, let us know what your ESC is in your region. Tell us about your role in your district and name one small thing you appreciate about your district. So would love to see the chat lighting up right now so we can get a better idea of who is in the room, what your role is, the things you're appreciating in your district. Yeah, and tell us about your district, tell us about your location, and tell us some of the things that you're appreciating right now. We are family, I love that. Sandy Valley, Painesville, Indian Lake, Baker Heights. So good to see you all here today. Thanks so much for being here. Ontario Local Schools, lots of folks in the room today. And I just really want to invite folks to continue to think about this community of practice as an opportunity to connect with your peers. Moving forward, we're going to be building in some more engagement in some of these sessions, some breakout rooms, and some opportunities to connect with your peers. Now that we've covered a lot of content and kind of worked on some basic foundations, we want to make sure that this is a networking space that's available to you. So keep an eye on the chat. Look at all these different folks that are out there trying to do this work all across the state of Ohio. These are folks that you can connect with and learn from. So super exciting and fun to see all of you logging on and joining in with us today. So keep sharing in the chat. You can jump back in there and share anything you didn't share in the first round. We really love hearing about what is going on in your district, who you are, and what your role is. So thank you so much for being here, and continue to lift up the chat all throughout this discussion. Put your questions in there, put your comments in there, put your needs in there, and we will be working to monitor and support those things. With that, I want to introduce to you the COHHIO Course to Home team. We've provided a lot of introductions in the past, so we're not going to go super in-depth with introductions today, but you can find more in-depth introductions in our recorded sessions on our webpage, which we will make sure you have a link to in the chat. But I'm just going to briefly provide you an overview of our team. I'm Lisa Brooks, if we haven't met before. I'm the Youth Housing Initiative Director here at the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. I use she, her pronouns. I'm located in Southeast Ohio. I'm down in Athens County, so I'm in the rural Appalachian part of town, but our headquarters is in Columbus. We'll talk a little bit more about COHHIO here in a moment. Alongside me on my fearless team is Ami Diallo, our Youth Housing Initiative Specialist. Ami, if you want to wave and show everyone your beautiful smile and let them know that you're here for them and all their needs and support. And then also Evelyn Guerin, our other Youth Housing Initiative Specialist, here for you and to support you on your journey through all of your McKinney-Vento and vulnerable student needs. So we are super excited that you are here with us today. We also have Susanna Whalen here, our state McKinney-Vento coordinator. And so I just wanted to give Susanna an opportunity to share any information in the chat that might be necessary for folks to know. Susanna Whalen is your state homeless education coordinator. She's got some trainings coming up for you all that are going to be available around the region to make sure that you're aware of McKinney-Vento rights and all of the important things that come along with the McKinney-Vento law. So she can share some more about that in the chat so that you all know where that information is. But just keep in mind that ODE is here to support you and has enabled us to have this amazing opportunity that is COHHIO Course to Home. And you can reach out to them, and you can reach out to us, and you can reach out to us together all at the same time as you have needs, because that is what we are here for. Make sure that you get connected to the resources that you need to support the students and families that you are walking alongside every day. So that's a little bit about us and our partnership with the Ohio Department of Education. And with that, I want to introduce our guest speaker. She'll tell us a lot more about herself here in a few minutes, but we have Karen Rice from Schoolhouse Connection. Karen, I don't know if you just want to say hi to everybody and welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here with you today, and I'm enjoying reading all of the wonderful things in the chat. So thank you so much.
Lisa, you're still muted.
Sorry, I lost my mouse. I had to chase it all over the screen to be able to get unmuted. So thank you, Karen. We're so excited to have you. Karen is an expert on English learners and will be able to provide lots of amazing resources from Schoolhouse Connection. So don't mind me as I lose my mouse between monitors. I will do my best to manage my mute button. You know how that goes. So a couple quick highlights about COHHIO, the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio. We are a multifaceted organization committed to preventing and ending homelessness and promoting affordable housing for all. And so those things really go hand in hand. Those of you that are out there doing this work, you know that affordable housing is a huge part of the challenge of homelessness. And so COHHIO is really trying to take on the challenges of homelessness and housing in tandem, because we know that's really how we try to get to the solutions of preventing and ending youth homelessness, improving our systems while also increasing access to affordable housing. We do that in a lot of different ways. You can kind of see that on the bubbles on the screen. And so we're going to walk through a ton of details about COHHIO Course to Home to make sure that you know what resources are available to you. But I also just wanted to highlight the other opportunities within COHHIO that you are welcome to explore at any time as your state level homelessness and housing advocacy resource. And so we have our annual conference, which we'd love to see you at. We saw some of you there last year in the spring. Great opportunity to learn more and get connected to other folks around the state doing the work, and national experts and other folks learning about innovative ways to solve the challenge of homelessness and the vulnerable needs within it. We have the Youth Initiative, which is where the COHHIO Course to Home team lives, and lots of other work like our Racial Equity Action Committee, who is working on equitable practice across the board, landlord and tenant law, making sure that folks are getting their housing rights taken care of. And so all of those different things are available to you, and we encourage you to explore our website and learn more about COHHIO. And diving a little deeper into, well, what's out there for the schools and the ESCs, that's where COHHIO Course to Home comes in. We really think of COHHIO Course to Home as a suite of services that has many components that are available to you. Right now, you're taking advantage of the Community of Practice that's available to you. And so we have an ongoing calendar for that, which we'll talk about in all of our sessions, so that you can make sure that you're able to tune into the live sessions and invite your staff and your colleagues and your coworkers into this space, because you really want to create a robust community where we can be learning together about the needs of students and families experiencing homelessness. So community of practice is key. We really want to see you all engaged in community of practice in the way that works best for you, whether that's showing up live or accessing recordings. And then secondly, I think very, very important is the technical assistance that we have available to you. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's just another important component that is a part of COHHIO Course to Home. I'm going to give a couple examples here in a minute. Most of you are already on our listserv, where we send out our newsletter and all of our communications. But if you're not, we're going to make sure you have an opportunity to sign up for that. And we have lots of other things we're working on down the pike, like making sure you have translated materials available. Obviously really important with the topic we're talking about today, and also some e-learning opportunities that we are working on. So lots to come, but there's a lot of stuff available now. So we wanted to make sure that you know about those things. And with that, Evelyn, I wanted to give you an opportunity just to briefly touch on some of these deeper components of COHHIO Course.
Thanks, Lisa. Sorry, one second. So we just wanted to quickly remind you all of some of the services offered through COHHIO Course to Home. We provide training, which is offered through e-learning virtually and in person. We're available to support you in system coordination by making sure you're connected with your continuum of care and all the resources that are available to best support your students experiencing homelessness. We also offer communities of practice, which is what we're doing today, and Lisa already touched a little bit about what that means. We also offer practice guidance, where we provide resources around best practices, tools, tips, and tricks to help support your work through our listserv and our quarterly newsletter. And as Lisa already mentioned, if you are not currently signed up for our listserv, we'll provide information on how to sign up today. And last but not least, we provide on-demand technical assistance to provide resources and supports for any technical needs your district might have related to students experiencing homelessness.
Awesome, thank you, thank you. You want to tell us about the website?
Yes, we also wanted to remind you about what a valuable resource our website is. Everything that we do in community of practice or in our listserv lives on our webpage. If we've ever shared any resource with you in any space, it probably lives somewhere on our website. We really want to encourage everyone to utilize that as a resource and be able to find anything they need from COHHIO Course to Home all in one space.
Thank you so much. And if you haven't visited our website in a little while, we've added some features to make it even more organized so you can find what you need. So thank you. I think this is me, right, Evelyn? I'm talking a little bit more about community of practice. Okay, thank you. So communities of practice, we're going to share a guide with you in the chat right now. We really want to make sure that you are getting the most out of this space. So we encourage you to review our guide so you can kind of understand what the kind of purpose of community of practice is. We've really been spending time on bringing quality content to you to make sure that you're getting the concepts of vulnerable populations experiencing homelessness. And as we move forward, as the year progresses for you at school, the year is going to progress for us here at COHHIO Course to Home, and we want to continue to make this an even more robust and interactive space. So lots more to come. We have some principles to guide our work here, so we encourage you to make sure that you understand what those principles are. We've covered those in some of our previous sessions. They're available in our recording, but I want to uplift just a couple of important ones here. Moving to number 3, ensuring strategies and approaches are focused on equity and advancing equity. We're going to talk about some of that today. And of course, being solution-oriented and creative in our process. That's really what community of practice is all about, thinking through those solutions and being creative and being solution-minded. So please take some time to review our guide to community of practice so that you can get the most out of this space. We also have some community of practice agreements. As we get more into our discussion space in the months to come, we want to make sure that folks understand what these agreements are as we share with each other. And this applies even as we're kind of working through the chat. So please make sure that you're listening for understanding. You expect and accept non-resolution. You're practicing both and thinking, and you're coming to this space with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to learn, right? Just like when we invite students into the space, we're hoping that they are coming with an openness and curiosity. We would ask the same of you. So thank you so much for being here. Again, a couple quick reminders. These are the sessions that we've already covered. So this is what's available to you recorded already, and that the ones with the check marks, right? And our next kind of session after this session will be in November, where we will be focusing on students in foster care and those young people who are justice involved and their intersection with homelessness. So that's what you have to look forward to learning more about in November. And these are some of the recordings that are available to you. And all of this is kind of laid out for you so you can make sure your calendars are marked and you're attending the sessions that you feel most fit and address your needs. So you can, more of this is on our website and available to you here. You can download our calendar. We tried to put this together in a format that tends to work for schools, hoping that that would help guide you in planning for these. I can't stress enough how much we really want you to be here and working alongside us in community of practice and planning to do so. I wanted to just talk briefly about technical assistance. Many of you, as you're diving into the new school year, are finding different challenges coming up with specific students, with specific families, with systems you're trying to develop and design within your district. And sometimes you need a little extra help when it comes to those things. Sometimes you need a person to bounce ideas off of, a think tank, and most importantly, you almost always need resources to further whatever that work is. And we really want to make sure that you know that that is what we are here for, to provide you technical assistance resources. We can do that in tandem with ODE in the times and ways that it makes sense. Last year, we had a situation where we had a school refer a young person who English was not their first language to a local youth homelessness shelter provider. And the shelter provider needed extra resources to be able to provide translation and support to the young person who was entering shelter. I was able to work with folks from ODE to make sure that that shelter got the resources that they needed and were able to coordinate with the school. And so those are some of the types of things we can do. We can work on those one-on-one situations where it's like kind of a one-off case and we have something specific going on. We can also work more broadly, like, hey, COHHIO Course to Home, we are wanting to improve our policies around this. Hey, we are wanting to improve around this. We want to learn more about how we can do additional professional development within our district. Those are all kind of fair game things. We have a nice guide to technical assistance that we put together for you that's going to be available in the chat, help you prepare for requesting technical assistance. You can email us, you can call us, and you can also check out the resources on our website. So please, please do feel empowered to ask for help and seek assistance, because that is what we are here for. Again, if you haven't already, please join our mailing list. This link is going to be available in the chat and also in the slides. This is how you stay most up to date with everything that is going on with COHHIO Course to Home. All right, so that is sort of all of your kind of reminders, refreshers. first time learnings of COHHIO Course to Home. And I want to start to kind of shift us from, wow, she just said a lot of stuff really fast about a bunch of resources. That's okay. We can take some of that in. You know, you can reach out and we can discuss that as you need. But now we want to kind of shift our time towards our topic. So let's get focused in on what it means to be experiencing homelessness and what we are seeing in the US. And I'm going to take my screen down for just a second and put up a 1-minute video that we're going to kind of watch to sort of ease us into this discussion of vulnerable folks and students experiencing homelessness. Just give me a second. I'm not looking away from you. I'm just looking at my other screen. So, thank you for your patience. Are you seeing it small?
Yeah, we're seeing it, but
Okay.
it's, yep, now it's good.
Yep. Okay, let me,
depends on our youth getting the best possible start in life. That's why it's alarming that 4.2 million young people experience some form of homelessness. That's 1 in 10 young adults ages 18 to 25, and 1 in 30 kids ages 13 to 17 who are at a disadvantage right out of the gate. Homelessness can look like sleeping in a park, staying in a car, or finding temporary, often dangerous shelter with other people. But youth homelessness is a solvable problem. Community systems can help prevent the trauma of homelessness by knowing the characteristics of youth who are at the greatest risk, like the death of a parent, their race, sexual orientation, gender identity, pregnancy and parenting, being in the foster care system, or juvenile detention. Together, we can intervene earlier to prevent homelessness so that each young person can get the best possible start in life. Learn more at chapinhall.org.
all right. So I think that starts to kind of acclimate us to the topic we're going to be discussing today. And for those of you that do want to learn more about Chapin Hall, they were present at our last session, and there's a recording available of that. You just can't get enough recordings with us. So with that, I'm going to welcome Karen to the floor to walk us through some really important information to guide our work in this space. So Karen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again so much for inviting me to join you today. I'm going to attempt to multitask and share my screen with you while I'm talking. So hopefully you can see this. I am coming to you from Schoolhouse Connection. We are a national organization, a national nonprofit that works for advocacy to help students overcome homelessness. So my background, I was previous to joining Schoolhouse Connection, I worked as a state coordinator for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program in Wisconsin. And in addition to doing that, I also was the migrant ed state coordinator. So I worked with migrant education across our state. And prior to that, I was in a school district for quite a few years, working both as a homeless liaison and also as a bilingual family liaison, a translator and interpreter, and just really helping our Latinx families access their education, access our school district, and help keep them on a path to success for that. So, so that's my background, and that is kind of what brings me here to join you today. So I am going to go probably pretty quickly through my slides. I have a lot of information to share with you. I do want to just warn you that my slides are very dense with words. I will not be reading them all to you, but I wanted you to have the information after this so that you can go back and reference and make sure that you have all of that information. So, so bear with the slides. They're mostly for you to use as a resource at some point in the future. So I will jump to my next slides here. All right. So as we begin, I want to just kind of talk through our important terminology, and feel free at any point to put something in the chat. I will try to keep an eye on the chat as well. And certainly at the end, we'll have some time for questions. So just kind of thinking through our terminology for today, we want to talk about English learners who are students that come from non-English speaking homes and backgrounds and are often learning English as second language or a third language or a fourth language, but English is not their first language. An immigrant student is a student who comes from another country and intends to stay permanently or for a relatively long time in the US. And then a migrant student is someone who is here because the student or their family is involved in seasonal agriculture work, and they're moving around and they're highly mobile. They are not automatically eligible for McKinney-Vento because of this mobility. So we first need to look at their living situation when we're thinking about our migrant students and really thinking through what is their living situation first and foremost. So just some context to this, I do want to say that I know that not all English learners are immigrant or migrant students, and not all immigrant and migrant students are English learners. So there is definitely a difference. There's definitely differentiation. But because our time together is really short today, I'm going to just kind of generalize a little bit and talk through immigrant and migrant students. The strategies are applicable for English learners as well. So I'm just going to try to be really broad just for the sake of time together today. All right, and then very quickly to talk through, this is a topic that we know is coming up a lot lately. Refugees are people who have fled their home country, and they are not here in the US yet generally. They are in their home country or another country going through that initial immigration process to request to come to the US. So that's different than someone who is an asylee, and that is a refugee who is in the US when going through that immigration process. So we tend to kind of use these terms interchangeably. They're not. The difference is where they're located when they're going through that process. So for example, many of our Afghan refugees, our Afghan families who are here, our Ukrainian families are here, they might be actually asylees here going through the immigration process and not actually refugees. So just kind of something to keep in mind as you're looking at people's living situations and learning about your families. And I think it's just really important to have that terminology correct when we're thinking about our families. I do want to also touch on unaccompanied alien minors. I will just be very frank, I hate the term alien minors. I think it's so much more than that. So, but for the sake of our conversation, this is the legal term. So this is youth under 18 who are coming to the US without a parent or legal guardian. And so in this case, this refers to their immigration status as unaccompanied. That's not referring to their McKinney-Vento status. Now, I will say that we know that many of these youth who are coming here are also unaccompanied homeless youth. So again, it's just important to know that difference. And we're going to talk more about kind of what that looks like and sponsors and how that plays into their status as well. So just to kind of set the stage and to set some context for us, those are kind of what we're looking at today. And again, I'm going to be just very general for the sake of our time together, but just wanted you to have those for future reference. All right. So let's just talk about the educational rights of undocumented children and youth, because this is really important. And we know that many of our families are coming to the US and they are undocumented. Certainly not all, of course, but many. So any child or youth who is in the United States has the right to attend and participate fully in school, regardless of their immigration status. Schools and district administered preschool programs, early childhood programs cannot ask about a student's immigration status. They can't do anything that would really hinder that student from enrolling in school. So we don't want to know, we don't want to ask for visas, we don't want to ask for any kind of immigration information when we're enrolling those students. Sometimes it happens if families feel comfortable, they'll share that information. But again, we're not documenting that anywhere. We're not putting that in the student's file. We don't need to know that. We just need to know that the student has a right to a public education. We also want to make sure we're not asking for things like social security numbers or citizenship documents or green cards or anything like that. And I think it's always helpful when you're working with students and families, whether they're undocumented or not, and whether you know that they're undocumented or not, to just reassure them that school really is that safe place. And schools are committed to being that safe place. So schools are not going to be contacting immigration, ICE is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, if you're not familiar with that, that there are no law enforcement officials that are going to get involved in that family's immigration status at school. What happens outside of school, of course, is not something that you can control, but we really want our students and families to know that school is a safe place. And for all McKinney-Vento eligible students, again, regardless of their immigration status, we have to be removing those barriers for participating, for transportation. And it's really important that families know that their immigration status does not affect their services under McKinney-Vento. And McKinney-Vento is not some kind of federal red flag that says the student is identified and flags as some kind of immigration status. So I think that's a really important distinction when you're talking with families and you're enrolling families. that when you talk about McKinney-Vento and you talk about what it means to be experiencing homelessness, that it's not like triggering some kind of, okay, this is a federal law and now you're going to be on a federal documentation as a student who is here. So just kind of keep that in mind in terms of the sensitivity of those conversations. One thing that's important to note when you're in working with undocumented students, again, you likely won't know if they're undocumented. I can't tell you over the course of my career the number of students that have chosen not to share that status ever, but the parents often will. And it comes up most often when things happen like CTE courses, so career and technical education courses that might require a social security number to participate in those classes. A number of years ago, I worked with a student who was taking a CNA class through her high school, and she got to the part where she was doing her clinical work and her hours for that. And she didn't have a social security number and couldn't continue in that course. And we had to try to think of some creative ways around that. Now, certainly we were also bound by the requirements of the law, but we really wanted to find other ways for that student to engage in that class, even if she couldn't complete that work. Of course, not sharing that information with her teacher or with those who were involved in the course. And then just as a note, foreign travel as part of any activity is not advisable for undocumented students. So just even those who are currently under DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and we're not even going to touch on that today, but I can definitely share more resources about that. But just due to some of the political things happening, it's best to not be thinking about any kind of foreign travel as part of school. So again, it's important to think through what barriers can we remove to full participation and what other options do we have? Are there other activities, other courses, other things that students can participate in so they're not running into these barriers? Okay, so looking at undocumented children and youth and McKinney-Vento, of course, we know, and you all know as you work with McKinney-Vento, that the McKinney-Vento Act is looking at children and youth who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so we want to just really be looking at these students' living situations. Are they doubled up? Are they tripled up? Are they unsheltered? Are they staying in shelters? What is their living situation? And so we know that nationwide, and I'm sure you know this as well, that approximately 75% of our families are in doubled up situations. And that's just very generally of families who are identified under McKinney-Vento. It's likely very similar for undocumented children and youth. However, that data isn't necessarily collected in the same way, so I can't give you an exact number, but that 75% seems to be the trend across all populations. So, all right. And then, of course, we know that families living in shelters, in public or private places that are not actually designed to be somewhere where someone lives, living in cars, in substandard housing. And I think especially when we're thinking about our migrant students, it's really important to think about that adequacy piece and is it substandard housing? As a state level person working with migrant education, I did have the opportunity to visit migrant camps where families lived. And I can tell you that even families who kind of had their own space within that, it certainly wasn't an adequate space for that family to be. In many cases, there was not electricity, there was not air conditioning. In the summer in Wisconsin, it gets pretty hot and pretty humid. There was not always running water. Students were sleeping on the floor. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that that's something that may come up. And then again, as I mentioned, unaccompanied homeless youth and migrant students who are living in these situations. So those students are not automatically eligible. They must first be identified as experiencing homelessness. And we're going to talk kind of more about some of those intersections. All right, before I go on, I'm just going to take a quick peek at the chat. It looks like there's a couple questions in here. All right, I think we're good. Let's keep moving forward. So unaccompanied youth, again, this is just the general definition under McKinney-Vento, a child or youth who lacks fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and is not in the physical custody of a parent or legal guardian. So we know that many of our youth who are coming from other countries alone are not here under the care of a parent or legal guardian. They may be here with a sponsor, and we're going to talk more about what that looks like. But these students are often coming, they are by themselves, they are sometimes thrown into different living situations with relatives or friends, and it can be really unstable. It can be sleeping on the couch at someone's house. It can be moving a lot between different houses. And so we really want to make sure that with that population in particular, that we're really looking at what is this unaccompanied youth, what is their housing situation, and are they also eligible under McKinney-Vento as an unaccompanied homeless youth? All right. We kind of talked through this a little bit, so I'm going to just very briefly say when we're enrolling unaccompanied youth, again, we don't want to ask about immigration status. We want to make sure that we're not having those conversations. We want our youth in school. We want them to be in that safe space. We want to be building those connections and be able to support those students. So students can enroll regardless of whether they are here with a parent or legal guardian. And we need to make that easy to do. And so often that includes making sure that those students know how to access school and school staff. They have the language services that they need to do that. And then there's really an opportunity for them to feel comfortable with someone to have some of those conversations. Certainly it's hard for a student to say, I'm not here with a parent, I don't have a legal guardian, I'm just here and I want to enroll in school. We can certainly ask these students as they're enrolling if there's somebody that we can list as a caregiver and have some kind of caregiver on file as an emergency contact. That's always a best practice. I think, you know, if a student gets hurt at school, if a student is sick, who is it that we can call and who is it that we can reach out to? And that does not have to be any kind of guardian. It doesn't have to even be the person they're living with. But it's always good to kind of just have that information about who that emergency contact or that kind of educational guardian can be. So just a note about unaccompanied youth who come from other countries. Living with a sponsor does not automatically mean that that student has fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. That sponsor that may have that student staying with them has no legal guardianship of that student at all. Many times those are not even safe and stable situations for students. They may be working to pay back their sponsors for all or part of their immigration experience. They may be required to be providing and contributing to the household. So that's really not any kind of legal guardian. That person certainly could be kind of that educational guardian or that caregiver, but also not necessarily. So we want to just be really particular and specific about making sure that we're not putting that youth in a situation that's even more unstable or more unsafe for them by saying, oh, well, we'll just reach out to this person if we have questions. Sometimes that can jeopardize their sponsorship with that person. All right. So eligibility, again, just want to touch on this briefly. Again, I apologize for all the words on my screen. Don't feel like you have to read all of those. We'll kind of just talk through the highlights. As with all McKinney-Vento eligibility, each situation needs to be evaluated individually. Immigration or documentation status has no effect on McKinney-Vento, and it's very important for families to know that there's not that connection or overlap, as we talked about before. So families do have access to early learning programs as well. They may enroll in Head Start or Early Head Start, regardless of what their immigration status is. So it's important to really also know what those options are for any young children that may be in the home, to be able to connect them to other partners. And just as a note about that, many immigrant students and families do experience homelessness on their arrival to the US. So sometimes they're fleeing natural disasters or violence in their home countries, or fear of violence. And so they may initially be staying with acquaintances or family or somebody they don't even know, because they don't have another place to be. And so these situations do typically meet the definition of McKinney-Vento. And sometimes we know that different family situations, especially thinking about some of our Afghan and Ukrainian families, they are part of resettlement services. But it's really important to think about those situations that they're probably not sustainable. So anytime a student may be in a situation where they're receiving resettlement services and they're being placed in a hotel, for example, that may be stable for a very short time. That resettlement service may include a month or 2 months of hotel stay for that student, but it may not be something that's sustained then after that. So it's good to keep those students and families kind of on your radar. And also to really look at that situation. Is it an adequate situation if a family is in a hotel or motel through their resettlement services, is the student sleeping on the floor, because then it might not be an adequate situation for that family. So, so just to note that those resettlement services are not always permanent or not always fixed, regular, and adequate. That's why we look at everything as it comes in individually. All right, so let's talk about, I skipped a slide here. Yep, I did. Sorry about that. Go back. There we go. Some cultural considerations of students who are doubled up. And I think this is really important to think about, because we know that families who come from other countries may have different values than we have in terms of living in multi-generational living situations. And so it's important to note that these families may be in McKinney-Vento situations, and they may not be. It's something that we want to be sure is on our radar, and that we're really working to identify the families that need to be identified. So when we think about shared housing or these multi-generational situations, we want to look at who's included on the lease. Where is everyone sleeping? Is the living arrangement really for that mutual benefit? Or is it this family moved in because they didn't have a place to go and they're looking for their own housing? Was one family already established in that living situation and another family moved in with them? Just kind of what those pieces are. So just for the sake of an example, I worked with a student once who his father, the parent, had 3 brothers, and the 3 brothers in Mexico, pardon me, sorry about that. The 3 brothers in Mexico decided that they were going to come to the US with their families, and they were going to buy a house together, and that was their plan. And they were all going to live together. They made sure that the house had enough space for everybody, and they were going to help each other with childcare and with different arrangements and school things. And it was just their plan to do that. So when they arrived to the US, they carried out their plan. They had 3 different families living in this house all the time, and that was the arrangement. So we really looked at that living situation, and that really seemed like that's an arrangement for mutual benefit. They're all contributing to the household. They're not looking for other housing. They all moved in together. And it was really kind of that mutual benefit and planned arrangement. So we did not identify those students under McKinney-Vento. On the other hand, I worked with a student who they were experiencing some violence in the community that they lived in Mexico, and they came to the US into the school district where I was working, and immediately moved in with another family. And then another family came and moved in with them as well. And pretty soon there was 3 families living in this very small trailer. And this family was looking for other housing. They had nowhere to go. They didn't have jobs when they got here. They didn't understand kind of our system of renting and how that all worked. And while they were contributing to household expenses the best they could, it was not their living situation where they planned to be. The students were all sleeping on the floor. There were, I think in the end, about 12 or 15 people living in this trailer, and it just was not a safe and adequate space for them. And so that family was identified under McKinney-Vento. So again, it's just kind of looking at each specific living situation to think about, is it shared housing or is it multi-generational? And we don't want to assume that just because family is living together, that that's a cultural value and it's automatically just a multi-generational living situation that they've chosen. So it's really important to help families be aware and to understand that doubled up in shared housing and whether or not they are eligible under McKinney-Vento. All right. So some strategies and best practices. I think this is really kind of the meat of our conversation.
Hey, Karen, can I jump
Yeah.
in with one question that I just saw that seems really tied to the last slide that you just covered?
Yes, please.
Someone asked a question. Yes, totally. Someone said, would in a situation where a student is in a hotel on a temporary basis be considered McKinney-Vento as it is not fixed or permanent? Do you want to talk just briefly about hotel motel so folks can think through that, as we have a lot of that going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say in general, students who are living in hotels or motels, that those are McKinney-Vento situations typically. The challenge comes in when the services are being provided through resettlement agencies, so refugee resettlements. I will be very frank with you that to me, that still seems like a McKinney-Vento situation, even though resettlement services are paying for that housing for those families. The Department of Education has said in that case, it's not necessarily a McKinney-Vento situation because it's not they're staying there because of the resettlement services. However, I think, if you're looking at where those students are sleeping, if you have a family of 6 staying in one hotel room and there's, multiple kids sleeping in the same bed, or some on the floor and some in a bed, we really want to look at, is that really adequate for those students? So this is kind of a complicated and tricky, and I can try to send some additional resources that really address this. But the Department of Ed has said that when the refugee resettlement services are being provided by a government agency, that they're kind of under the care of that agency, and they're having their housing paid for, even though it's temporary. It's not temporary in that moment. So I'll be honest, I don't agree with that, but that's the information that we have received, and I'll be glad to send some additional information, Lisa, for you to send out to others that talks more about them.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I know there's nuances to that, so I appreciate you trying to do a high level, even though we know everyone has kind of individual needs that we have to look at on an individual basis. So thanks so much for taking a step.
Yeah, thank you for raising that question. I've been trying to go as quick as I can, so I apologize for not keeping my eye on the chat, but that the refugee resettlement piece is very tricky, and there's been a lot of tension around that, especially given the new students and families that we have coming to the US. So I don't know that I have any resources linked in here, but I will make sure that I send those out to you all so you have that information. So thinking through just some strategies and best practices, I really am excited to share with you some actually practical things that are happening in some places around the country. So just very briefly, identifying immigrant families experiencing homelessness or migrant families. It's important to really have kind of that culturally responsive or culturally sensitive lens when you're having those conversations with families for identification. So instead of using phrases like, well, are you experiencing homelessness? Or are you in a homeless situation? Thinking through more, how can we describe our living situation? What's your current housing situation? Was your plan to be living here with family members? Are you staying with them temporarily? These questions don't necessarily seem more culturally sensitive, but they might be. And we know that even with our non-immigrant and migrant families, that the term homeless often has a stigma. And so we want to just make sure that we're talking with families in a way that's just really sensitive to kind of flagging some of those words. It's really important in these moments to make sure that you're providing private spaces for families who may want to share their documented or undocumented status, to say, no, we just got here, we just immigrated to the US, we are undocumented, or we're here as refugees, or things like that. And then providing appropriate language services. That's really key. We want to make sure families understand the questions we're asking, have the information in their native language to the extent practicable, and just really have that resource in the school district to know that they'll be able to ask their questions and to understand what's happening to them in their native language. Collaborating across programs to provide wraparound services is really important. Just very briefly, it's important to know who in the community are these resources for families, whether that's language services, whether that's organizations that specifically work with these populations of students. But we want school to kind of be that place where they know that they're going to be able to also access what they need in the community. So cross-training is really important, as always with McKinney-Vento, but then also to know who in these organizations might need to access kind of that collaboration, and just, we're working with these families, we suspect they're experiencing homelessness, we want to refer them to you, and vice versa. And providing families with information is it's incredibly important. Again, making sure that families have this information in their native language. We know sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes families speak Indigenous languages as their first language, and we may not be able to provide written materials in those languages, for example. But families often may speak Spanish or another language as a second or third language. And so at least making sure that that information is as accessible as possible. So we do have on our website information in Spanish, in Dari, in Farsi, in a number of other languages, and connections to other states that have those as well. So I will share that with you in the chat. I think it's also linked at the end of my PowerPoint. But having multilingual or bilingual staff in enrollment and in front offices is key. We want those families to be welcomed right away and know they have someone that they can communicate with. making sure they have information on attendance and bus routes and things like that. You know, this is a whole new educational system for someone that's coming to the US for the first time, and it can be very overwhelming to kind of know where to start and to know what those resources are. I'm going to very quickly just jump down to give you these school district examples. Our time is coming very short here. New Philadelphia City Schools in Ohio. I don't know if Lori is on the call with us today, but I've had the pleasure of talking with Lori Hall a number of times, and they are very intentional in their use of a Spanish-speaking interpreter to enroll students in school. So instead of simply providing a translated form, they also have a staff member who will sit down and go through verbally with that family. They recognize that sometimes families don't have literacy in their first languages, and so it's hard. Providing that translated form might not be the best solution, but to really have that kind of verbal interview of the family removes that literacy roadblock for identifying students. In Metro Nashville Public Schools, their homeless liaison has shared that approximately 30% of their identified students experiencing homelessness are from referrals from their Title III and English learner programs. And they do a really excellent job of cross-collaborating so that their migrant and immigrant and English learner services teams are also hearing their McKinney-Vento information and vice versa. So they do a lot of referrals back and forth with each other. In Shakopee Public Schools in Minnesota, they are using their ARP HCY funds to provide mental health services for their high school youth who have really had traumatic immigration experiences, and that trauma is really impacting their ability to learn. So they've contracted with a bilingual counselor who is doing some mental health services with those students to process and navigate that immigration trauma so that those students are more ready to access their learning in school. So I think these are really great examples of things that are being done, and would just kind of encourage you to think through how your own strategies are happening in your district and in the schools where you're working, and how you can really remove barriers and make that accessible to families. All right. Again, building trust with families. I think I've tried to emphasize this as much as possible, so hopefully you've gotten that. But making sure that that enrollment and identification is just really accessible to families. They know and understand their McKinney-Vento rights in a language that they can understand, that they know that school is a safe place for their students, that immigration and customs enforcement is not called every time a student comes in to enroll, things like that. So it's really, really important to be building trust with these students and families. Again, identification, we want to make sure that families know, are we hanging up our posters in the community that are also in other languages, or are they just in English? Do they have the name of the homeless liaison to contact, or do they also have the name of someone who can communicate with them in their native language and help bridge that, that language barrier between the homeless liaison? So we really want to make sure that we're looking at what are those practices for identification that really support our students who might not speak other languages and their families. And then thinking through accommodating unique circumstances. This is really an important one. Many of our unaccompanied homeless youth play dual roles. They may have jobs outside of school. They may be trying to provide for their family in their country of origin. They may be providing childcare for younger siblings. They may work long hours at their job in order to remain living with their sponsors and send money to their families and paying off their debts that they might have incurred while immigrating. And so they have a lot on their plates, and we really want to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to kind of accommodate those circumstances. So again, thinking through New Philadelphia City Schools, when I talked with them, they shared that the district really acknowledges and honors both the education and work responsibilities that these students have. And they work with students to arrange their schedules in such a way that when students commit to regular attendance, they can end their day a little bit early to go to work and to do that. And so it really helps those students to feel like the school understands my situation, they understand where I'm coming from, and they're willing to work with me as long as I'm willing to work with them on my attendance and my participation in school. All right. Oh, I did it again. Sorry about that. Okay, so just very briefly, I know we're almost out of time, and I know there's some questions in the chat, so I'll share this just very briefly, but migrant families experiencing homelessness may have some very unique needs that we need to really look and see how are we meeting those needs. I want to give you an example of a district Greeley-Evans in Colorado, they have regional offices that house their migrant advocates. And so they work very hard to collaborate between their school district and those regional offices with those migrant advocates. They do cross-training, they do home visits together, and they're doing dual identification so that they're identifying their migrant students at the same time that they're identifying their McKinney-Vento students, so that they know, their migrant advocates know when a family is experiencing homelessness, and their homeless liaison and homeless services staff know when a family is eligible for their migrant education program. And so they really work hard to do that cross training and cross collaboration. And they have a really successful model that I just wanted to share in terms of meeting the needs of migrant students. I'm going to just move forward because I know we're really short on time. Just a little bit about higher education opportunities. Undocumented youth can apply to public colleges and universities in every state except Alabama and South Carolina at this time. Youth that have legal immigration status or who are documented can apply for financial aid even if the parents are undocumented, but undocumented students are not eligible for federal financial aid. I do want to note that I linked in a place to look to see about states who offer in-state tuition and state financial aid to undocumented students, and say, please check this out with the caveat that this is ever changing, and in our political climate, it's ever changing. And so just make sure that you're checking that out for the most up-to-date information. All right, and then very briefly want to share a few things that are happening with ARP-HCY funds. I think ARP-HCY funds are a really excellent way to begin working on removing barriers for these students and to be doing a really excellent job with identification and service provision. So just very briefly, there's a district in Middletown, Rhode Island, that's using their funds to hire a family services coordinator to support their multilingual families. They've developed contracts with Boys and Girls Clubs to help ensure that these students have access to their after-school wraparound services. I mentioned New Philadelphia in Ohio, and they have been having some struggles with attendance of their immigrant students that are in the walk zone. So they used funds to purchase bikes to help those students get to and from school. And to remove that barrier, they knew they couldn't provide transportation on buses because it was in the walk zone. And so those bikes serve as a way to help students get to school. In Grand Island, Nebraska, ARP-HCY funds are used to hire a bilingual parent liaison to support families in their early learning programs. So really making sure that their youngest learners are connected with the programs that they offer. In New Mexico, there's a charter school that's using funds that hired a bilingual navigator from the community. So someone who's really familiar with the services in the community and the community as a whole, to help them navigate housing and to apply for housing and to go through that housing process. And then of course I shared about Shakopee Public Schools in Minnesota already. So there's some really incredible work being done with ARP-HCY funds, and these are all on our website. So if you want more information about these, you can find it all there. All right. And just very, very briefly, as I wrap up, I do want to say Schoolhouse Connection has a scholarship program, and the deadline is early October for those applications. But we really want to help our immigrant and undocumented youth and just our youth across the country to access this scholarship. It comes with support from Schoolhouse Connection. We have some really great case managers that work with our students. So if you have immigrant youth, migrant youth, English learners, please share this information with them. And with that, I will say I did also send some resources, so take a look for those as well.
All right, well, I didn't come on camera to hurry you off or anything. I just wanted to make sure that you had the support you needed as you got to your wrap up. So Karen, thank you so much. You just took us all over the country and gave us all kinds of different examples and ideas of how schools can go about and districts can go about supporting students experiencing homelessness and English learners. And so we really, really appreciate you being here and appreciate you sharing this wealth of information with us. Are you all able to see my screen right now? I just wanted to make sure. Okay, awesome, thank you. We are just really, thank you so much, Karen. That was so informative, and you covered so much in such a short period of time. We want to thank everybody for your questions. We are doing our best to answer those, have been answering those throughout. Karen, feel free to jump in the chat in this couple of minutes as we begin to wrap up and answer folks. And we will also be sending out a robust follow-up email with a recording of this session, notes that highlight everything that Karen and we shared with you today, as well as a link to the recording. So spread that around to the district, right? You can be a catalyst to get this information out into the hands of the rest of your district. And so we thank you so much for being here. We want to invite you to share feedback with us so that we can continue to improve this community and this space for you. Just a simple anonymous Google form here that you can give us some feedback about the session. We encourage you to do that. We also have a bunch of resources for you alongside Karen's resources. We put some resources together here that are specific in Ohio so that you can locate things here in our state. We also put together some guidance and tip sheets that are available to you, different trainings that are available so you can dive deeper on this topic. And if I don't lose my mouse again, these are our kind of normal resources, all of your sort of landing pages where your hub of kind of folks that are here to support you, like COHHIO, like the Ohio Department of Education, like Schoolhouse Connection. These things are all available to you in the resource slides in the attachment that you have in the chat there. Of course, do not hesitate to reach out to us directly. You can send an email to us anytime at homelesseducation@cohio.org. And with that, we just want to thank you so much for being here today. We have another minute or two, so feel free to throw your questions in the chat, but that is all the content that we have for you today. We want to thank you so much for being here, and we will send out follow-up information to answer your questions and to make sure that you have all of the content that we shared today. So great to see you all, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Enjoy this weather, and we will see you back here in November. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.